So it was a cool winter night about a year and a half ago, and I was home alone in my East Hollywood apartment. My husband had just left on tour. He did this often, and I was very comfortable with it. But this time, things were a little shaky between us, and I was feeling lonely and anxious as I was sitting there contemplating our situation. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I noticed my leg. My left leg felt a little weird. In fact, it was swollen. It was bigger than my right one. And my pants weren't too tight. They were probably skinny jeans, but not more skinny on one side than the other side skinny jeans. And it clearly looked like my left leg was larger than my right one. So naturally, I start to panic because this is a clear sign that something is very wrong with my body. And the fantasies start bombarding my brain as I envision my husband coming home from his tour with all of his drums stacked in front of his face and not being able to see me dead, starts yelling for me, "Jenny, what food did you leave out to rot?" He has an accent, by the way. And then I wouldn't answer, and as the snare drum made a hissing sound as it was placed oh so carefully on top of the bass drum, my decomposing body would emerge in his view. My poor Catholic father would be doubly devastated that again I missed a sacrament because I was married by a judge at Beverly Hills Courthouse and not in a church by a priest. And they wouldn't even be able to have an open casket as it would have been at least a week before anyone found me. It was 1 a.m. and my entire family is back east and my husband is in the air somewhere and I might have one friend still awake drinking somewhere in Hollywood, so I call my friend Jess, who is clearly not still drinking somewhere in Hollywood but was asleep, and she proceeds to tell me her aunt died of a blood clot in the leg, so it does happen, and if it turns out to be an emergency that I could call her back, but she has to wake up for a personal assistant job in a few hours and she had been out drinking, so she needs to go back to sleep. So an emergency. You know, how can I tell if it's one of these emergency things or not? Because therein lies the rub, the Neosporin hydrocortisone ointment rub. I have been known to be a little bit of a hypochondriac in my past. It hadn't been an issue for a while, but I've suffered from just about every disease in the book and out of the book. There are many symptoms I've had that you simply cannot find in books. And the internet has been really helpful for that, spiraling me faster down the dirty, dark rabbit hole to hypochondriac hell. The web is the worst thing to happen to a hypochondriac since disease was invented itself. And they tell me what I already know, that I'm dying of AIDS, cancer, aneurysm, embolism, hypothyroidism, appendicitis, arthritis, encephalitis, or tumors, tons and tons of tumors. Tumors, you know, they can grow anywhere. I don't even need to go to WebMD to know that this leg thing is clearly a blood clot clinging precariously to a blood vessel in my leg, or worse yet, an artery in my leg, which at any moment can become dislodged, and I would suffer a fatal heart attack, embolism, or stroke. I become hysterical because I was clearly facing imminent death, and imminent death is a scary thing, especially when you are alone. So in tears, I drive myself to the hospital, not the closer hospital, but Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. I used to volunteer there, and I know that they have lower staff infection rates than any other hospital in the area. And this is actually really interesting because they do this by implementing a checklist system that originated back during World War II when they would fly B-52 bombers. The planes would crash because pilots would forget one step in the complicated protocol. When they implemented a checklist, the B-52 stopped crashing and helped us win the war. And so this same is with staph. Cedars is the Normandy invasion of staph infection. So I go there and dripping with shame, as if I had just jumped out of the novel The Scarlet Letter, yet unable to ascertain for certain whether I'm crazy or not, I limp my slightly more swollen left leg into the emergency room, where I proceed to wait for hours because they apparently thought I wasn't an emergency. Which is where I was able to sit and further hypothesize that perhaps it's not a blood clot, but that my kidneys are failing from drinking too much wine in my 20s, and now my body is filling with fluid and I'll have to endure dialysis until I find a new kidney. And then I'd be way too tired to continue with my failing career or my tiring relationship. I clearly was going to die alone in Hollywood without the strength to even adopt a kitten. So in the midst of all of my positive thinking, a kind young doctor, that would have changed things quite a bit. A kind young doctor with warm brown eyes asked me to explain what's going on. He says that an ultrasound could be helpful, and I say, how much is an ultrasound? I'm not sure about my insurance. And he says, I don't know that information. And I say, well, what would you tell your daughter? There's the daughter part. Now, I could have gotten a different doctor, one that didn't look me in the eyes or didn't take in what I was really saying. And as I reveled in the kind attention from this man, my delusion started to give way. I was not this person. I did not drag myself into emergency rooms every time I got a mosquito bite because I thought it was flesh-eating bacteria. I was this person when I was 17, but I had done a lot of work. I grew up in circumstances where I experienced a lot of anxiety and fear and pain as a child, and I had developed the system of naming my fear. It was far easier to face appendicitis than it was to face what was going on in my home. And here I was, once again, not facing what was really going on in my home, in my life, or in my heart. I didn't want to face a failing relationship or the lack of validation of having a career in Los Angeles. I didn't want to face the loneliness I was feeling in Hollywood when my husband was on tour all the time. I'd rather focus on a blood clot. And that was far easier than making changes. And this doctor reminded me of that. He reminded me what it was like to be seen. And by him seeing me, I was able to take a good long look at myself. The old Jenny was a hypochondriac, but the person I had grown up to be was merely what I like to call now disease aware. And she was very capable of making changes in her life. So I looked down at my legs and realized that they looked exactly the same. And what set this off, who knows, it could have been a muscle cramp, an itch, a little spasm that set off this fear festival. But after offering me a Xanax and me politely declining, this young doctor offered to walk me out of Cedars-Sinai. He also put in his file that I had not been seen, so I didn't have to pay anything, which was amazing. Who does that? And I went to bed that night full of intention and gratitude for the one friend who answered, for the lonesome journey to Cedars, for their staph infection checklist, for the graveyard shift doctor who saw me, and for the hypochondrial kick in the butt that made me realize how healthy I really am. Thank you.